Hello and welcome to the Climate Trends podcast. I'm Shreya Jai, Energy Lead at Climate Trends, and today we are talking about a topic that's both household and national: how India can cook more cleanly. Joining us today, our guest is Purva Jain from IEEFA, author of India's Clean Cooking Strategy, E-Cooking, the Next Frontier. Purva, it is great to have you with us. In this episode, we'll explore why e-cooking matters now, how it puts up against LPG and PNG on cost and air quality, the main barriers to adoption, and what policy steps could accelerate a fair and affordable transition. Welcome to the podcast, Purva.
Hi Shreya, thank you for having me here.
It's always a delight to talk with you, Purva, and we like to delve into this very interesting topic. I went through the report, some very interesting findings, and you've taken quite a leap in suggesting e-cooking in a country with the kind of societal and behavioral norms that there are. But very interesting findings and thought-provoking as well. But before we go into the minor details, can I just request you to give us a big picture? Just summarize the core argument of your report and explain that why, despite near universal electrification and rapid renewable addition, cooking has not followed the electrification pathway so far.
Always a pleasure to speak with you as well, and we all are a fan. I think the core idea of the report, if you would see, is in the title of the report. What we are trying to say is in the report is that India has made massive progress when it comes to clean cooking in the last decade and more than that, the last few decades, and especially the policy changes that we have seen in the last 15 years, and already that has happened. Now, what we need to do is take it to the next level, and that's where e-cooking can be the next frontier for clean cooking in India. And that is, I think, the crux of the report, the core of the report. When you're talking about, how it has not taken pace, and, you'll be talking about increasing electrification. We speak about near universal electrification in the country. We talk about, higher greening of the grid. But with, in tandem to that, we don't see e-cooking increasing because these things are also new. Near universal electrification is something that we have only achieved a few years ago. Greening of the grid and solar power, if you talk about, is something that we've only started talking about, say 10-15 years ago, where we have had started to have massive deployment of clean energy. So these are new. Of course, e-cooking, that automatically also makes e-cooking a good follow-up, like what next to do, what is the next low-hanging fruit we can target, and e-cooking comes as a good next there. Another challenge, of course, when it comes to e-cooking is I feel a lot of it boils down to awareness about, because we are very used to a different sort of cooking. We're used to a flame-based cooking. We've been doing it for years now. And, the kind of food we eat or what we do. So it's also the idea of having a flame-based cooking. So that transition would require more awareness, more understanding, more education, and a good, strategic policy nudge can really help drive that transition.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. I'll now ask you to, address the point that, you mentioned the low-hanging fruit. What are the low-hanging fruit in terms of, say, adaptability of this? Are we looking at some regions or some household types, or maybe commercial kitchens where it would be easier for electric cooking to take up and also have kind of a larger impact?
Yeah. No, I think that is absolutely how you've put it is absolutely correct that there are certain areas we need to have a staggered approach when we want to have, a massive adoption of e-cooking in the country. Of course, it's something that cannot happen overnight. It's something that we need to work constantly towards, and a staggered approach where we start with, say, proper urban areas which have higher availability of electricity during the day. And then you also have like commercial kitchens, like you mentioned. And there are pilots in the country where commercial kitchens and schools where you are seeing the midday meals in the Anganwadis, there are pilots that are being run already. So again, this idea is not completely novel. It's not that nothing is happening in this. It's just that we need to now, have the policy nudge to really explode the idea, and how we probably saw in the case of electric vehicles. So there are pockets that can be identified, which could be your urban areas, commercial kitchens, where we could start off with doing more when it comes to e-cooking, and then it can slowly transition for the country as a whole as well.
Right, absolutely. So let's go on to the barriers part. It would be challenging for this country to move towards e-cooking. It was challenging for us to take a large section of this population away from firewood cooking to LPG, PNG, which is still seeing adoption, but not at such a scale that the government would expect it to be. Then, addition to it is the device cost, cookware compatibility, perceptions, cooking habits, and obviously, reliability of electricity supply and connection. Can you touch upon some of these barriers, and how can they be addressed both in terms of policy and also making it more accessible to a larger population?
So I think the barriers to e-cooking, if you look at it, one, of course, is the capital cost of devices. And when I say the capital cost of devices, I mean like, your induction cooktop or your e-cook range, or you want to have like, air fryer or anything that you want to have which could add a e-cooking aspect. So those are more expensive. If you talk about just like, what we have touched in the report is an induction cooktop, and we have compared it with your existing LPG stove and your PNG stove, and we have compared the cost of those, and of course it comes out to be higher compared to especially the LPG stoves, because it's a technology that's been available in India for a longer time. So a new LPG stove is way more affordable than only PNG stove or an electric induction cooktop. uh, and also there's a possibility of transitioning your existing LPG stove to PNG stove, which impacts the efficiency a little bit, but that possibility is there. It does not require you to buy completely new utensils, because induction safe utensils are a little different. They have that flat bottom issue. So that is another investment that comes out when you talk about the capital cost of transitioning, especially if you're talking about families which are already using LPG or PNG, and those are probably a good audience for transitioning to clean cooking, because they would be already, a lot of them would be in urban areas. And there again, the challenge of having something invested in something already and then transitioning, that would be an added cost. So the device cost and becomes one big barrier. Another one is the device availability. I think what we saw in the case of electric vehicles also, for example, we saw that when it started as a fuel option in India, there were not many designs, there were not many not many things to cater to a larger audience. So right now, what we see in the market is mostly the single top induction cook stoves, which are probably not enough for Indian families, where we have like a family of four, family of six, and the cooking needs are higher. So probably that's not enough. And you also have double induction cooktops in the market, but they're much higher and much more expensive when it comes to the pricing. So that becomes the device. Also, the serviceability, because it's not such a widely used, and it's not the primary fuel used in the country. You do not see induction, if somebody has a device issue, the serviceability issues are also there. You do not have companies investing in that, probably how we have in the RO in India. Like you would have, if something goes wrong, the service is very prompt and it's easy to acquire even from like the company or from outside. So that serviceability issues are also there right now, just because I think the demand is not at that level in the country at the moment. Then, of course, there are also the lack of policy. I would say like the limited policy support that is around there. Government has talked about e-cooking in 2023 earlier, and there have been programs, there have been campaigns where we talked about. There have been big demonstration campaigns conducted by the center as well. So there has been talks about e-cooking, but there has also been the clean cooking roadmap that India has come out with. But I think a more directed, more strategic, something specially for e-cooking, maybe a roadmap just for e-cooking, that is something that is also, that allows that policy nudge, that makes people believe that, it is something to stay and it's a longer term option for them to be. That also I would consider a barrier. Another, of course, main barrier would be the availability of the reliable electricity access. The government data says that, of course, it's increased massively. We are looking at like more than 90% for urban households, and even for rural households are soon catching up with the urban, like when the reliable access electricity supply. But those are numbers, those are averages. How you have it on ground is something could be a little different, and that is something that awareness is also missing within people to know that what are when we are really not having electricity, is it really impacting our possibility to cook on electric devices. So I think those is a combination of a lot of things, where I think the right policy nudge and awareness could really resolve a lot of these issues.
Right, absolutely. And in this country, obviously, there are several other aspects around, shifting from one mode of cooking to another, and there is this behavioral aspect as well. For as long as I know, induction cooktop are seen as a bachelor's pad cooking device. But obviously, it would require a sea change, not in terms of just policy regulation, but awareness as well, as we have seen in several other programs of the government also. So what are your thoughts on that? How do you how what kind of awareness programs or what kind of policy awareness does the government need to think when it comes to propagating e-cooking across the country?
I think the step one has to be the acknowledgement and acceptance of e-cooking as a solid solution, solid clean cooking solution in India. Right now, when we talk about cooking and we talk about clean cooking, it's only LPG and PNG that keeps coming in the conversation. That's where a lot of capital support is also being provided. So I think that transition or that understanding and acceptance of e-cooking to be able to be a solid solution for India also needs to come from the consumers, from the device manufacturers, from the government as well. And I think, if the government starts thinking in that direction or taking out like a policy paper where we talk about, how the e-cooking roadmap for the country could look like, that could itself, create so much conversation on the topic that there would be, because everybody needs that policy guidance. You want how solar started in India. We started with a target. We started with a target which looked, and then in 2 years we double, triple the target. It looked unachievable, but we are so close to achieving that now. We are one of the pioneers in clean energy deployment, renewable energy deployment in the world, and that's simply because we started with the target and we started with the policy idea of having something in place. And I think that's where the policy direction is needed. For example, see what Kenya is doing. Kenya has come up with the e-cooking roadmap, and they have a very simple target there. They have a target of 10% of households need to transition to e-cooking by 2028. So it is something like that. Just having that, and that makes you believe that there is e-cooking potential. The device manufacturers or the companies would want to invest in more designs, will try to adapt, like what you're saying. There's a cultural barrier, there's an understanding, like what I also mentioned earlier, that we are so used to the idea of flame based cooking. We do that fulka, which is a chapati, which we directly do it on the flame, which is such a common feature of every Indian household, and we would not want to believe that we can live without that. And that is something that probably if the device manufacturers look into, and it's easily possible to be done on an induction cooktop as well. And I know families who are using the current design of induction cooktops doing their fulkas, probably doesn't get that charry flame on it, but it does give you a good taste and fills your appetite well. So I think it's just that the starting of that policy nudge, and obviously from the consumer side also, then then the consumer also automatically starts becoming more aware. Again, like I would quote the example of electric vehicles. What we saw, when we saw there were only 50,000 registrations per year happening in back in 2016-17. Right now in 2025, up till November, we have had 2 million registrations of e-vehicles in 1 year. So that's the kind of transition that can happen with, like, some policy support, some device and global adoption. So a lot, factors they can, is it feels like a lot, but just few things start, coming in place, and a lot can change with that.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that in such a comprehensive fashion. Let me move to more trickier part of this discussion, and which is the cost. Uh, Both for LPG and PNG, India is largely, if not completely, dependent on imports. But comparatively, the electricity sector is a bit more self-sufficient. So, from that context, can you give us a cost comparison? What are the main drivers for these cost differences, say electricity tariff, cost of LPG, PNG, cost of rooftop solar, etc.? And how does it impact the cost for a household at the end?
Yes, of course. See, like you rightly pointed out, that India imports most of its LPG and gas as well. So we're importing about 60% of our LPG needs. We're importing 50% of our natural gas, even though there is a higher priority allocation of domestic natural gas to residential sectors like domestic PNG, but it still impacts. Like the pricing still gets impacted. Earlier, we had a wider formula where we were looking at international hubs, and now we have tweaked the formula for gas pricing, but it's still dependent on the imported crude basket for the gas. So the impact of like international prices, what's happening globally, also impacts what's happening in India. Additionally, you're importing, so that also puts you at energy security risk because in case like we have seen earlier in the case of gas, for example, there were a shortage and transferring to other companies for arbitrage opportunities that has happened. So it leads to, like, of course, energy security because you're importing. It leads to price volatility risks because global prices keep changing, and especially in the last 5 years we have seen, due to the pandemic, due to the onset of Russia Ukraine war, we have seen a lot of global price volatility happen for fuels like gas and even LPG. And when the prices shoot up really high, when your high percentage is dependent on imports, when the prices globally shoot up high. So for example, we saw like the Saudi Aramco price go up really high, and that impacted directly the LPG prices in India, where we had to sort of then give a higher subsidy. So we had to introduce a 200 rupees universal subsidy for everyone on the gas cylinder prices. So that also results in that problem of introducing subsidies and the need for subsidies with those high import prices and high dependence. So it is a lot of like a chain reaction that happens with the high import dependence, which you would see. So for example, I think for example, like the import bills also go up. So it's an entire cycle of high import bills, high price volatility risks, and energy security risks, that and then resulting fiscal subsidies that happens with being dependent on import. When you talk about e-cooking, of course we are more self-sufficient when it comes to cooking. There is a flip side to that argument that you're talking about clean cooking, and then you're still using a fossil fuel for generating your electricity, of course. But I think what we are seeing is a higher greening of the grid. We are seeing that it results in higher efficiency in terms of your cooking. The fuel use have been shown to be lower when you're using e-cooking versus LPG or PNG, so that also helps. And when you talk about the cost, just the cost of using the devices, there are again two aspects of it. There is the operational cost and there is the capital cost. We discussed already that the capital cost is higher when you talk about e-cooking because the devices, and when I talk about capital cost, and a lot of numbers are there in my report, when I talk about capital cost, it's about acquiring the stove or the cooktop, the connection price, the utensils. So if you look at these, then of course the double induction cooktop comes out to be the most expensive, but it's very comparable to the cost of acquiring a completely new PNG connection, because the connection price of a PNG is quite steep. So it becomes very comparable to that. Of course, LPG, because if you remove the connection price, if somebody already has an LPG connection, it becomes very affordable. Just the refill, just if you have to take the cooktop and the utensils. But otherwise, of course, e-cooking is expensive, but comparable to the PNG when it comes to the capital cost. But when we talk about the running cost, the operational cost, e-cooking, actually, we have calculated the numbers for the fiscal year 2024-25 for Delhi for a family of 4, and it's actually come out to be the most affordable when you compare it with LPG and PNG. And how we have done these calculations is we've used like a 2021 study and used the consumption patterns, the average yearly consumption patterns from that widely recognized study, and used the per unit pricing or the, if it says that 8 refills are required for a family of 4 if they're not stacking any other fuel, then we have taken the ongoing cylinder prices, the refill prices, and we calculated the cost. And then similarly for PNG, it says like 137 standard cubic meters is required required, and then we have taken with the ongoing cost in Delhi, which is like 48.59 rupees. And then similarly for electricity also, and the tariff that we have taken is a higher range tariff. So we have not taken the tariff which is for 200 rupee or 200 units consumption or 400 units. We've taken the tariff which is for 400 to 800 units of consumption where no government subsidy is provided. So when you do the comparison of the cost in all these different segments, you see that e-cooking comes out to be the most affordable. It is in fact 14% cheaper than PNG, and it comes out to be 37% cheaper than a non-subsidized cylinder. So when I say non-subsidized, means that there is completely no subsidy, not even the universal subsidy. It's in a hypothetical calculation because right now there are no cylinders which are being sold at that price. And then there is the 200 rupees universal subsidy application, and with that it still comes out to be 10% cheaper than using a cylinder. Of course, when you calculate the pricing for the PMUY customers, it's a completely different discussion, and I think that is not even the target audience for e-cooking at the moment.
Good you mentioned PMUI because I was thinking to ask about that. But yes, agreed. They are not the target audience right now for this kind of scheme for e-cooking to take up. But do you think a PMUI for our audience, the Ujjwala scheme, would a scheme like that, a subsidy support scheme or a subsidy plus awareness scheme, would help in uptake of e-cooking in a certain section of the population? Do you think redirecting subsidy spend towards device support or some kind of financing for financially vulnerable households or for commercial kitchens would help them to pick up e-cooking much more faster and in a efficient fashion?
No, of course, there is, support required. What the shape and form that support would take would something that is something that needs a little bit more, policy discussion and understanding. And there is support required for, and support for different segments would be, of course, something that could be really helpful. For a longer and a wider adoption of e-cooking in the country. So when you talk about, say, commercial kitchens, of course, there is some, if the government could come out with a mandate and come out with the mandate and support for those, that could be helpful. When it comes to like urban areas, if there is a support in, say, in terms of devices or in terms of the, some sort of rebate in your electricity tariffs, because we have seen that studies say around 800 to 974 units is something that is required. We have examples of people using up to only 2 units of electricity per day for a family of 4 to 6, even when they're using, e-cooking. So that results in about, 70 to 80 units per month. So if you're looking at, and if a family, when we take the tariff from 400 to 800 units, it really does not make a difference. If you're consuming 600 and then you go to 660, your tariff slab is not changing. But for families where the slab could change, that's where probably some, rebate in terms of the electricity prices could be helpful, where there would be an hesitance. If you're going from 200 units to 260 units and you're going in a different slab because of e-cooking, that's where some support could be helpful. Of course, what the government is doing with the last year's launch of the solar rooftop scheme, the Surya Ghar Bijli Yojana, and that's also something that could be eventually very helpful for spreading e-cooking in the country, or massive adoption of e-cooking in the country, because we're looking at 300 units of free electricity. That's what the target is with that scheme. And if that really happens, then a lot of families could already be just using e-cooking and saving money by not spending on an additional fuel, instead of having to not pay any electricity, just not pay any electricity bills, but still have a PNG connection or an LPG connection. So there are support and some, in terms of, transferring of subsidies, you're already looking at the government paying 1,600 rupees to PMUY customers. And that's where, a support by not the government, but the OMCs are providing that support in terms of your stove, your first refill, your connection price, and all of that is already happening. So if you're looking at that sort of amount and being able to give electric cooktop with in some utensils to a family, which can transition to e-cooking, that could be very helpful. Of course, the challenge between urban and rural areas also happens with the electricity connection, and that's why I feel like urban areas are maybe the first set we need to transition before we move to the rural areas.
Right. And talking about urban areas, let's talk about one aspect which largely remains ignored in the whole cooking debate, cooking discussion is the household air pollution, which is India's largest pollution source. However, its share falls to about 5 to 10% in urban areas. Some of these studies show that LPG cooking is considered as a clean fuel. But your data, your study shows that LPG PNG stoves still release certain pollutants. So, what are these emissions that these stove produce, and do you have can you explain us how one can capture these household pollution sources, including emissions from the LPG, and how it can be addressed?
So I think I would want to take a step back and say that yes, there is no denying that in comparison to solid fuels like firewood or dung cake, LPG offers massive health and indoor air pollution benefits. It has really helped India transition to, the cleaner source of cooking. And solid fuels, we all know, have resulted in major health risks, especially in women and children who are exposed more to the smokes and fumes. And this is where LPG and PNG have been helpful by significantly lowering the indoor air pollution in comparison to solid fuels. What e-cooking can do really here is it can take it one step forward. LPG and PNG do create invisible air pollutions, and now research has started to come out correlating these emissions to health issues like asthma and wheezing. And what they release is nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, and particulates and ultrafine particulate pollutants. And all these ambient concentrations can lead to harmful effects on health, like inflammation of airways and lung concerns, especially when there's a long-term exposure of these pollutants, and even more when it's a poorly ventilated home. So the poor air quality outside or the cold weather, which limits the ventilation, and that's where if the household's not using range hoods or exhaust fans, then the air pollution, the indoor air quality can be really detrimental to health. So, what e cooking helps here is that it does not release the more harmful nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide, and it can really help resolve the issue of indoor air pollution, which is, of course, already better when you talk about in comparison to solid fuels by using of LPG and PNG. But now studies have started to come out with the challenges of indoor air pollution and with LPG and PNG as well.
Lastly, I want to ask you that in terms of the next policy steps that the government should take, should it address more towards e-cooking being an increment to the kitchen, or should we look at a completely electrified kitchen? What kind of, policy direction helps in the Indian context much better?
I think that if there is a policy nudge and if we can look at the complete electrification of kitchen, especially new households and new like buildings that are coming up, if mandates can be put in place for those, that would be very, very helpful. We have seen, say, for example, what New York has come up with. It said that, any building higher than 7 stories from 2026 onwards has to be all electric. So we have examples globally of countries, cities trying to achieve that. It is possible. So if government can mandate that, because if you leave the option, and then the takers would obviously be low. So for the mandates for new buildings, with probably government can have a conversation with the real estate companies as well, and if the possibility is there, and then of course if the households want to install something, not a mandate, but of course outside in New York probably the mandate does not allow to bring back gas in any form, but at least starting with that, the installation that is given is to be electric. That could be very helpful when it comes to residential buildings. Then mandates around what commercial kitchens could do, because it's also easier when you're using like large scale commercial kitchens. There's so much already is automated and electric in those kitchens, so just transitioning the cooking aspect also to electric could be very helpful, and could help in massive adoption of e-cooking as well. So these could be starting steps for it would require some push. And of course for people, if they want to try and you already have a PNG or an LPG connection, go then of course try with the induction cooktop you have somewhere lying around in your house, or you have an air fryer, shift some of your roasting or steaming to that air fryer, or your microwave, like to your oven if you have an OTG, shift some of that to that OTG. I think that could be a starting point for the consumers, because I'm sure everybody somewhere has something lying, which is like, just start boiling your water in an electric kettle to begin with, maybe.
Absolutely. Thank you for the tips. And obviously, thank you for this very engrossing discussion. It's always a delight, and it's always so much to unpack with you and so much to learn from your findings and from your studies. So, thank you for this discussion. We conclude our discussion today. However, I know that there's so much to unpack on this topic, and we might bring you again to talk more about it. But thank you again, Pura, for joining us and sharing such clear data backed and insights on what India's transition to e-cooking could look like, and also touch upon so many aspects, especially around air pollution.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here, and it's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. And to our listeners, we hope this conversation helped unpack why cleaner cooking isn't just a household choice, but a national opportunity tied to affordability, energy security, and public health. If you'd like to explore the full analysis, you can find Purva's report linked in the episode description. This is Climate Trends Podcast. I'm Shreya Jai, and we'll be back soon with more conversations on how India can build a fair, resilient, and climate aligned future. Thank you for listening, and take care.